Okay, hello everyone. Today I'll be introducing to you a way in which you can approach different questions. So I'll be introducing to you this framework TKR2 to for you to use whenever you're doing any science questions, regardless of whether it is section A or section B. So firstly, I will explain what this framework is, and then the following section would be about using this framework, and I'll be showing you how this framework can be used in relation to questions in the tests that you do. Okay, so first and foremost, what is this TKR square? So if you learn math, R square is basically R times R, right? So the framework is actually TKRR. And each letter actually represents different words. Alright, so I'll be going through that. So T is for topic. So what is the topic? And then K are the keywords. What are the keywords related to the topic? R, the first R is about relationships. So what are the key relationships related to the topic? And relevance. Relevance refers to, based on this 1, 2, and 3, which one of the keywords and relationships that you have identified is relevant to the question. Alright, so this is a more detailed explanation about the TKR square framework. So while you are doing your questions, after you've read the questions, you ask yourself, what topic is this? So you do T. After that, you ask yourself, what are the keywords related to this topic? So you would have done R. After you have identified the keywords, move on to the first R. What are the relationships and processes related to this topic? So that is the first R. And then you move on to relevance. Which keywords and relationships identified in 2 and 3 are relevant to the question? So you do the other R over here. So some of you may be confused about what is the difference between keywords and relationships. So over here I will just explain to you briefly about the difference between these two things. So keywords, let's talk about the topic of heat. So some keywords related to the topic of heat would be heat gain, heat loss, what else? Cooler, warmer. So we have words like conductor, insulator, and then evaporation, so on and so on. So these are the keywords that needs to be in your answer. However, not all of them are relevant, which we will talk about. Step number 4. So when we are talking about relationships, what we are looking at is how do these keywords link to each other? Do they have any links? So now let us look at the relationships. For example, let's take a look at gain heat. So gain heat, when you gain heat, you become warmer. So we see heat gain and warmer forming a relationship. And then when we talk about conductors, so it will be gain heat and conductor equal to rate. Is it faster? Slower? So these is how you form relationships between the different keywords. Another example would be gain heat and evaporation. Lose heat and condensation, or freezing even. Alright, So this is how you draw relationships in relation to your keywords. So for you to come up with the relationships, you firstly need to have this one first, and then you do this. So however, step 2 and step 3 must already be in your head when you do your revision. So the purpose of your revision is to make sure that you already know about 2 and 3 when you sit for your examination. So it cannot be the case that you don't know your 2 and 3 before you sit for your exams. Alright, so let's take a look at relevance. What does relevance mean? Is it related? That is what it means. So for example, a question, let's say the question is asking me about evaporation. If the question is asking me about evaporation, do I talk about freezing? No. So we don't put any of the keywords related to freezing. Do we talk about condensation if the question is asking us about evaporation? No, we do not do that. So we only talk about the keywords and the relationships. So keywords and relationships related to evaporation. So this is your relevance. Okay, so now that we have went through this framework, so remember TKR square or TKRR, TKR square or TKRR. Use them. Now we're going to show you how to use them when you're doing your questions both in section A as well as section B. So let's take a look at some examples. All right. So Gopal observed some fishes in his tank. He wanted to confirm whether the fishes are living things or non-living things, and he decided to conduct 2 experiments to find out. All right, so do we know that this question is about conducting an experiment related to living things and non-living things? All right, so we can do our we can take a look at the question first, and then we do our TKR square. If the aim of the experiment is to find out if living things need air to survive, which 2 setups should he use? So the question is asking us about which 2 setups should he use. So we have to use our TKR square. TKR square. What topic is this, first and foremost? So they're asking you about which setups he should use. So it's about the design of an experiment. So it's about experiment design. So what are some of the keywords that we know related to experiment design? So we know the keywords such as fair test. So what is fair test? Only one variable change. Dependent, independent. So we know about reliability. So these are some example of the keywords related to the topic of experiment design, or how to design a good experiment. So now let's move on to our first R, which is relationships. So let's think about some of the relationships. So let's look at fair test first. So for us to have a fair test, what must we do? We see a relationship between these 2 keywords over here. So for fair test, only one variable must be changed. Okay, so what now? Let's take a look at our other R, relevance. So what is relevant to this question over here? We see that what is relevant is actually this relationship here. So they are asking you If the aim for the first experiment is to find out if living things need air, so if living things need air, so this is what we want to test. If living things need air to survive, which two setups should we use? So based on our relationship, it needs to be a fair test. So what are we changing? We are trying to see whether things need air. So it is air that we need to change, only air. So only one variable needs to be changed, so only air. So let's compare. Let's compare A and B. What is different? Two fishes, no cover, but we have fish food. So fish food is the only thing that is different between these two setups. Are we testing for fish food? No, we're not. So A and B are not the two setups that we need to use. Let's compare A and D. Two fishes. This one has a cover. This one does not have a cover. What does the cover do? Let's think. Covers actually prevent air from entering. So in setup D, air cannot enter, but for setup A, air can diffuse into the water and the fishes can have air. So let's take a look at A and D. What is one thing that is being changed? Air. The number of fishes is the same. There is no fish food. So these two experiments are the same, except for this single variable. So we know that that is the answer, A and D. Let's take a look at, now let's go on to try out this second part of the question. If the aim of the second experiment is to find out whether living things need food to survive, which two setups should he use? So remember, a fair test, only one variable needs to be changed. Through our TKR2, we have identified this for the question. So if living things need food, so what needs to be changed? What is the only thing that needs to be changed? Yes, food. So let's compare. Just now we did a comparison between A and B, right? And then we have identified that between A and B, what is different is fish food. And therefore, the answer is A and B. Simple. Alright. So now that we have done that, I'll leave C for you to try out. Let's try this other question. So Judy found fruit A as shown below in her garden. She observed that it has hard, tiny hooks and concluded that it cannot be dispersed by animals because the animals will not be able to eat and digest the fruit. So she concluded that this fruit is not dispersed by animals. Is her conclusion correct? Explain your answer. So now I will highlight for you what her conclusion is. This is a conclusion. Because it has this, because the animal cannot eat or digest the fruit. So let's take a look at this question and see whether she is correct. Let's do our TKR2. TKR2. So firstly, what is the topic here? The topic is about seed dispersal, right? The topic here is about seed dispersal. What are some of the keywords that we have learned through the topic of seed dispersal? Let me just use another color so you can differentiate it. TK, so keywords. We know about animal dispersal. We know about wind, explosive action, we know about water. So for this question, it is asking us to check whether this fruit can be dispersed by animals. So we have to think further. We have to branch out our animals. Can be by eating, can be by carrying. So now we move on to our first R, which is our relationships. which is seen here. So animals, animal dispersal can be done through eating or can be done through carrying. So what is the relationship that we know about eating? It needs to be sweet. It needs to be fleshy. It needs to smell nice. What do we know about carrying? So we know for carrying that it has to have tiny hooks. It needs to be small so that it can hook on to the hairs, right? So now let's do our final check, which is our R, relevance. So the question is asking us whether this fruit over here can or cannot be dispersed by animals, because Judy concluded that it cannot be dispersed by animals because it is not sweet, fleshy, or smells nice. However, when we look at our relevance, we are supposed to check animals, right? But over here, we have seen that eating is not the only way in which animals can disperse seeds. We also have carrying, which is done by fruits which have tiny hooks and are small, which cling on to the hairs of animals. So over here, we will need to put this in our answer. This is relevant here. So remember, in this question, wind is not relevant, explosive action is not relevant, action is not relevant, water is not relevant, but only animal is relevant here. This is relevant, and we know that this is relevant. Okay, so is her conclusion correct? So based on our TKR square, we would say no, because animals can also disperse seeds through carrying them on their bodies. So you would have to explain your answer, right? So you would say that seeds that are dispersed this way often have tiny hard hooks as seen in the one found by Judy. Full stop. So this would be a good answer and you will get the whole 1 mark. So we see how the TKR square framework allows us to have a step-by-step process in which we know a lot of stuff in our head. However, through the TKR square method, we slowly cut down the amount of things that we need to think about, and we only find that that small piece of information in our head that is required by the question. Alright, so for the previous 2 examples, I have shown to you how you can apply this framework to section B. Now I will go on to show to you how we can apply this to section A. So let's try it out. Freddy conducted an experiment with 4 setups as shown below. Beakers P and S contain 1 water plant each, and beaker Q and R contain 2 fishes and 1 water plant each. A layer of oil is poured into the beaker. In addition, Freddy placed beaker R and S in a cardboard box. All the beakers were placed in a brightly lit place. Which beaker would have the least amount of oxygen at the end of the hour? This is a very interesting question, so let us take a look at it. So the question is asking us which beaker would have the least amount of oxygen at the end of an hour. Okay, so where have we heard this thing before, this word oxygen? So let's do our TKR square. Topic. So this word oxygen, and then we see plants here, and then we see fishes here, and then we see a layer of oil, and then we have light. So we need to understand this experiment over here. We need to understand that many processes are happening here. So the topic is asking us about what do plants, so we draw relationships here, plants and light. We have our photosynthesis. We have a layer of oil. A layer of oil does not allow gases to enter the water. So we know that no oxygen is entering the water. We have fishes here. What do fishes do all the time? They respire and they use up oxygen. So this topic is actually asking us about processes related to air, specifically photosynthesis and respiration. So what are our keywords? Firstly, our keywords would be photosynthesis, respiration, presence of light, CO2, O2. Those are some of the keywords that we need to know of. So then we move on to our first R, which is our relationships. So we know that photosynthesis, so let's just use the word P, happens when there is light, CO2, and water. We know that respiration happens all the time. We know that plants carry out P. We know that animals do not carry out P. Okay, so now we have to find out relevance. We know all this information here. We know all this information here. So which one of it is relevant? So let's take a look at the question. So which beaker would have the least amount of oxygen at the end of the hour? Alright, so remember, what you need to remember is that there is light here, but this one is in a cardboard box. So quite an important thing to know. So light does not enter because it is in the box. So let's take a look at what we remember. So there is a plant in a beaker in P. So we know that there is light, there is a plant. And since no oxygen can enter, we know that the plant is also respiring all the time, right? You know that the plant is respiring all the time. So there is CO2 in the water. So because there is light, is photosynthesis happening? Yes. So we have more O2 being produced. Okay? So only a single organism is using up the oxygen here. So we see the next setup, beaker Q. Got light, fish is using up the O2, plant is using O2, but O2 is also being produced, right? Because of P. So then let's move on to the next example. Cardboard box. There is light, cannot enter. So plant is using O2, fish is using O2, no O2 being produced, so no P. So same thing, use O2, but no produce O2 because of no light. So we are supposed to choose which beaker would have the least amount of oxygen at the end of the hour. So we know that there are three organisms here. So these ones are using the most oxygen. However, we know that beaker P is producing O2, therefore beaker P is immediately out because one organism and it's producing O2. Let's take a look at beaker S. So beaker S only has one organism. It is not producing O2 because no photosynthesis, because no light. So we know beaker S wouldn't really use that much because it's just one organism, right? So we compare beaker Q and R now. When you compare beaker Q and R, beaker Q is producing a bit of oxygen because the plant can photosynthesize. Therefore, we know that it is being refueled, right? The O2. But in beaker R, it is using but not reproducing the O2 not replenishing the O2 that it's using. Therefore, this one would be using a lot, but it will not be refueling. Therefore, we know that the answer is R. So the answer is 3. And you'll get 2 marks here. Okay, so I hope that you remember what I've taught in this lesson today. So TKRR, you can use it for any of your questions. So what you need to remember is that for you to use TKRR properly, you need to revise. And you need to know your topics. You need to know your keywords. You need to know your relationships between the keywords. And for R, when you are doing your question, you need to find out what information is relevant. So I hope you've learned something today. And I do hope that this framework does help you in your doing of science in the future as well as in the present. So thank you.